Morning, my name's Phil Walker. I'm from Wisden Cricket Monthly magazine. I'm editor-in-chief there, and I'm joined on this lovely Monday morning in Robertsbridge with Richard Gray, CEO commercial of Gray Nichols, one of the most prestigious legacy brands really in the history of the game. And we're here now just to chat in general terms really about the brand's identity, about its origin story, and of course the challenges that the industry faces, the challenges and the obstacles to overcome in the months and years to come, as the game and the industry around it has to adapt to the realities of modern industry. So first of all, Richard, you joined here, you said in 94?
Yeah, full time, having worked during school holidays in the years before that.
Right, 94, the year of the power spot as far as I'm concerned. So if you can take yourself back to 94 and describe what this place was like and in the context of the industry at the time, and if you can try and then take that memory to the here and now and the changes and the differences that you've seen, not just within the Gray Nichols family, but within the industry as a whole. It's an easy one to get going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess going back a couple of years before that, when I sort of was around during school holidays and things, we were still up in an old chicken farm up on the hill. Very sort of much just an operation which was producing cricket bats. The main office was up in Cambridge. But by 94, there was an office here, albeit a couple of porter cabins. But funnily enough, that year, Brian Lara had broken all the records with his Gray Nichols scoop, and that had really started to put the brand, back on the map after perhaps a couple of difficult years, mainly due to our rackets business having difficulties with rackets going to graphite and going to Far East, etc., which is another story. But yeah, the company was back on the up, and Lara was really sort of led the way to a sort of happier period in the 90s.
Mentioning him, and we could reel off the names right from the top of your head, from Clive Lloyd and Gower through to the heroes of the now, to Babar Azam, to Harry Brook, who I met a couple of months ago now. And you have a vast family of great legendary cricketing names, but they're absolutely essential, right, to the identity of Gray Nichols, and you have to pick the right kinds of people as well. Is that fair to say? And how important is it when you get the right person and it happens to combine with the peak of their powers, such as it with Lara in 94?
Yeah, I mean, that was just a perfect coming together of, a great talent, in the right place, the right time, and breaking 2 massive records in 1 year, which doesn't often happen. But you're right, it makes a huge difference. I think having that the brand up on the world stage in front of the world's TV cameras is obviously second to none, and if you can get an alignment of the stars with everything happening at once, then big tick. Similarly this year with the Ashes, of course, where the Gray Nichols players on both sides performed hugely well, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, we'll come to the players, because the relationship between players and cricket bats, not just cricket bat makers, is a fascinating one, because anyone who's ever played the game is as obsessive as you can be about anything, really, and there's no one more obsessive than a top class cricketer and their cricket bat, right? So we'll come to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Going back to that question, what about the industry itself? The mid-90s version of the cricket bat making industry and the industry now 30 odd years on.
Yeah, so when I started, it was a very different industry, really. It was dominated by really the English-based brands, so obviously Gray Nichols, Stuart Surridge, Duncan Fernley, Slazenger at the time, and it was really a sort of battle between us brands, which basically dominated the world industry. The Kookaburra came in from Australia and developed their bat range and everything else. But a lot of those have fallen by the wayside in recent years, and now the industry is far more affected by what's going on in India. So obviously you've had the rise of Indian-based brands in recent years, and we've deliberately sort of worked to develop our own operation to meet the challenge from Kookaburra in Australia. We set up our Australian factory back in the 70s, and in India we set up a base in India probably 20 years ago with a view to developing the Indian market. So I guess that's really how it's changed. There's always been a large number of sort of smaller, more local backed companies, which has continued, perhaps proliferated a little bit before COVID, but COVID perhaps has reduced the number of companies down a little bit. But essentially, it's a much more international market than it used to be.
Gray Nichols was probably ahead of the curve, fair to say, in recognising that the game was globalising, because, again, you can think of a number of players from around the world that were picking up Gray Nichols bats, and I get the sense that you were aware quite quickly that the game was necessarily expanding.
Yeah.
To expand with it.
And hats off actually to going right back to my grandmother just after the Second World War, when obviously things were very difficult.
Yeah.
She merged with Nichols in the Second World War to make Gray Nichols, and very foresighted, started sponsoring international cricketers at that time, including Wally Hammond, who was then the England star, Keith Miller, who was the poster boy of Australian cricket, Lindsay Hassett and others. And that really set the theme for the rapid expansion in players in the 60s with likes of Ted Dexter, Richie Benaud.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Totally international. In the 60s, I think at one time we had the captain of every test playing tier 1 country using Gray Nichols.
In my grand scullery back in Essex, there is a small Ted Dexter bat, right?
There you go.
Picked up at a car boot sale for me when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and it had the Roberts Bridge markings, on the top.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful piece of wood, that.
Yeah,
genuinely picked up beautifully as well for a 7-8-year-old lad. So it goes all the way back, but let's take it all the way back to the very genesis of it then, right?
Right.
So how old is Gray's, first of all? And you say it merged in the
1940.
1940 odd. And so tell me the origin story of it, how it came to be right from the start.
Yeah, sure. So Gray's was founded by my great-great-grandfather, who was world rackets champion at the time, which was predecessor to squash.
Yeah. Also
a very good cricketer. He actually played for, I think, the 22 of Cambridge against an England 11 in 18-something.
Did he get any?
Not particularly well, I don't think. No, it certainly hasn't come down the genes either.
Right, okay.
But, very keen cricketer. So obviously expanded from rackets to cricket bats, etc. Got a very good reputation in the Cambridge University sort of area. Ranji used Gray's bats.
So was he your first?
He would be the first Gray's ambassador.
Wow.
At a similar time, Nichols was a local carpenter in Sussex, started his own factory in Robertsbridge, where we are today. And again, strangely, Ranji also used his bat, which was very common in the time, to switch around between brands. But then W.G. Grace used Nichols to get his 100th 100th, and we still got the letter in the museum. So I guess the two brands were equally prominent in cricket in those early days, in the golden age of cricket. And then over time, it very much stayed local. Things got difficult with the First World War, the crash of the 20s, and that obviously led to the condensing of the industry in the Second World War, which is when my grandmother merged with Nichols in the back of a London taxi, signed the deal.
So she's one of the real heroines of the story.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And in fact, her husband had died just before the war, leaving her with a young family. And she basically stepped in and ran the company.
Wow.
Incredible story, yeah.
And that's on the business side of things.
Yes.
What about in the workshop? Any sort of legendary names from way back when that you've grown up hearing about?
Yeah, I mean, all the way through right to the present day, it's been quite common to have people who've been with us 50 odd years, and that's continued to this day. I mean, there was Ted Jolly was a very well-known bat maker down here at Robertsbridge. Similarly, up in Cambridge, we had very well-known. Richardson was another bat maker that was particularly well-known. And more recently, sadly, John Gasson, who passed away last year, did over 60 years with Gray Nichols, joined us at 16 and made bats for some of the names you've already mentioned.
So explain that to me. What is it about the craft, do you think, that makes it a life's work for people?
I think it's obviously. I mean, none of them are particularly sort of mad keen cricket fans. Obviously, it's come with the work, but it's more of a sort of passion for the craftsmanship of handcrafting a piece of willow into a cricket bat, I think, and in a very special surrounding, and having the pride of seeing your product on display at international level, I think.
Do you feel like Gray Nichols is held to a certain standard because of its name and its history?
Yeah, I think so, without question. And we've obviously been proud to sort of try and combine that heritage with innovation, but also keeping the quality going. And obviously, as you probably know, we're the only company who actually grow and fell all our own willow for that very reason. So you've got control over the raw material. So
explain that then to us, from the first sapling, although it's technically not a sapling, is it? Because I was corrected on that from somebody else. But from that first moment to the final stickering of the bat, explain how Gray Nichols oversees that whole process then. So you have your own...
So I think without going through all the detail, essentially it's that the key is having control from all the way through.
Right.
From planting that piece of willow in a set bed, which then sprouts, and the rest is the whole process that you'll see later.
And you have a number of sort of spaces around in the south of England?
Correct. Yeah. Mainly south. If you draw a line from the Wash down to Bristol, mainly south of that line, but there are trees north of the line as well. And that's obviously the key component of a cricket bat. And so if you can get that right, you're halfway there.
And over here in the UK, what's your impression of the health of the industry? That being a reflection of the health of the game itself, of course.
I would say, obviously, we all had huge challenges during COVID, but I think since COVID, cricket benefited from being about one of the very few team sports to be played during COVID in that first year. And I think the outtake of that has been as a huge number of kids have been attracted to the game and are playing the game. And therefore you're widening your pyramid of people who are playing, and that's got to be good news for the industry. Gray Nichols, of course, but the wider industry. So I think that's one real positive, and I know it's got its not everyone likes the 100, but I think that's brought in a whole new sort of generation of cricketers who perhaps wouldn't have got involved in cricket had the 100 not been there, male and female.
Has that been reflected in your numbers?
Difficult to sort of pin it down as to what's...
Sure.
So our numbers are good, yes.
Yeah.
Difficult to put a finger on exactly why. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, the players have been fantastic for us. But I think it's a combination of factors.
And how does a business adjust to the very real cost of living challenges that people are experiencing at the moment? And cricket is not a cheap game.
No.
And so you have I would guess a sort of an ethical responsibility, right, to your customers and also to the game itself, while also maintaining people's salaries within this setup as well, right? So that must be a constant challenge for you.
Yeah.
Finding the right line.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Gray Nichols has always, as you know, been a premium brand.
Yeah.
So we've always been at the top end of the game. So that sort of sets how we sort of our pricing strategy for the future. But you're right, you have to be mindful of the fact that to keep the game going, you've got to have an affordable options. That's the reason we really got involved some years ago with the Quick Cricket program at the time with ECB, which obviously has now morphed into other programs. At the time, cashmere bats were very popular, so we did quite a lot of work in producing an affordable cashmere range. And the latest challenge, I guess, is to find affordable options, particularly for the junior market. As willow gets more and more scarce and more expensive. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that. But you're absolutely right that if we are looking for the benefits of the 100, say, then that new, more youthful audience coming through needs to be serviced and helped out. And obviously, many parents are struggling to find the money to help their children get the best stuff. And so the range of equipment here available ranges from the highest, most premium end all the way down to the most affordable within the context of the market. Yeah.
And again, going back to that vertical integration, because we've got control of the factories and everything else, it does enable us, I think, to offer more attractive pricing for certain products and premium pricing for others.
The Willow situation, then.
Yes.
So you say yourself, Willow's becoming more scarce. It's not cheap. There are some murmurs around the possibilities of bamboo becoming used, right, to make cricket bats. The MCC have released a statement in 2021 based on the back of some research done at the University of Cambridge, talking in regards to sustainability, and obviously how relevant that is today. And just to quote back at you, this angle of willow alternatives should also be considered, said the MCC, with the researchers stating that the most suitable types of bamboo grow abundantly across China. Low-cost production could make bamboo bats a viable and ethical alternative. So where does Gray Nichols stand on the twin questions of the scarcity of willow and the possibility of alternatives?
Yeah. So I guess the two are interlinked. So the good news is, as I say, because we control all our own willow, we are in the process, and have been for many years, in the process of expanding the number of trees that we've got in plantation. So it's not that we've ignored it. It's being planned, but obviously a willow tree takes 20 to 25 years to grow. So it's not something you can fix overnight with the increasing demand worldwide. But that's in hand. We're also in discussion with MCC on the whole possibility of bringing in alternative materials longer term, and shorter term, the MCC have already amended the rules to allow lamination to be used in junior bats. So that's something we're looking at very closely indeed, because obviously that means you can get more yield out of a willow tree by using smaller strips of willow to make a bat. So those are the two most interesting conversations we're having on the willow side.
Do you envision unintended consequences of a shift to other alternative materials, such as the balance between bat and ball, say? Bamboo, apparently, from what I've read, and I'm no expert on this stuff, but apparently from what I've read, the compression of bamboo can actually result in more power being put through the ball. And as bats become more powerful anyway, and the balance between bat and ball becomes more challenging as with every day, it seems, in the game, that could potentially tip it over into...
No, you make a good point. And in fact, we've been here before, as they say, because probably 10 years ago there was a lot of debate around the use of carbon fibre in bats. Kookaburra brought out a bat with a carbon fibre sheet on the back.
Ricky Ponting,
exactly,
carbon back on the bat.
Gray-Nicolls had the carbon fibre handle, and MCC took a very close look at everything and decided that wasn't the way the game wanted to go, because they wanted to maintain the balance between bat and ball, and decided to put in the laws that the bat has to be made of a single piece of timber, which has obviously restricted considerably what we and other manufacturers can do in terms of alternative materials. But there seems to be a willingness to look at possibilities. But you're absolutely right, and once you change a law, at the moment it's very clear, single piece of willow, not much you can do with it. As soon as you make any changes with materials, if you allow bamboo, do you allow carbon fibre? Do you allow other, metallic compound?
Do you think it's inevitable that some changes will be made and the strictures will be loosened as regards to what constitutes?
I think at certain levels of the game, it will probably have to have just on a numbers basis.
Yeah.
Because if there's more and more people, there are more and more people playing cricket, especially in the Indian subcontinent, there aren't enough trees to meet that demand, and therefore something's got to give. I suspect, a bit like baseball in the States, you'll still have willow down to a certain level in the game, and then alternative will be allowed below that.
Yeah.
Would probably be the sensible way to go.
Okay, interesting. Meanwhile, Gray-Nicolls continues to innovate and also to respect and, if you like, luxuriate in its history, right? Because we have just behind me here the power spot that I mentioned earlier. That was my bat in 94. I had the Gray-Nicolls Ultimate around the same kind of time as well. The power spot has been reshaped and re-energized for a modern market, and the same, of course, with the icon bat, the Scoop. The Scoop, which was in the hands of Gower and Clive Lloyd and Greg Chappell when I first remember it, and as you say, was in Lara's hands in Antigua in 94, and you're bringing that one back in the early new year as well. So tell me about the thinking behind the resurrection of these great names, these great titles, and how you also have to bring it up to date with the modern market as well.
Absolutely, yeah, very good question. So I guess the reason all these bats have been launched in the first place is really being led by what the players want.
Right.
Because of our relationships with so many great players over the years, I guess it's given us a unique insight into where the game's going in terms of what they need from their bats and more widely other equipment. So that is if you look at all our innovations over the years, it's always been player led.
Right.
So the reason the Scoop was launched was in the day, if you remember, the bats were had very, very thin edges indeed, and as the game was changing, as one day cricket came in, and people wanted more exciting batting, so the need for bigger bats, but obviously you needed to have the pickup as well. So the Scoop was designed to give you those big thick profiles, but with the weight being redistributed from the back. And the idea came from a South African inventor, Garner, who'd seen it work in golf.
Right.
Yeah, and basically adapted it for cricket bats, and it just took the world by storm. We couldn't make enough. They were actually rationed. Scoops were rationed. Retailers could only buy a couple of Scoops within their wider order, and it just set the world on fire.
The genius of it as well is that once you do it, any other bat maker that does a version of it will always just be an imitation of the original, right? Because it's so distinctive. There's never been a cricket bat made like it before or since.
Correct.
You had the Dynadrive, I remember, with two mini scoops on either side.
That's right.
But it didn't take quite as all-encompassingly, right, as the Scoop.
Because the Scoop just reset the boundaries, didn't it? Everybody, it was suddenly, wow, it looked different, it performed differently, it was a different sort of weight range, everything was different.
And so I'm interested in this because there isn't one here yet to pick up, because as you say, it's not out just yet. But with the pressing techniques of bats today, so different to what it was when the Scoop first came out, is there still a need for that kind of innovation when you can have a bat with a lot of meat in it and that picks up like a feather, as does the power shot, which I picked up earlier? Is there still a need for that kind of out-of-the-box thinking as with the Scoop?
Yeah, because the challenge is obviously the MCC have now restricted the size of the bats, but they're still pretty big, as you know, at the top end of the game, and it's probably fine to make a few hundred bats for the professional players that pick up beautifully and yet have that big profile that they like to see when they look down the spine when they're batting. But obviously, with the natural nature of Willow, you can't guarantee that every cleft is going to be that same density.
Sure.
So we're always looking at ways of how can we get a bat that looks similar to the bats that the players are using, which is obviously drives the club game and the schools game, and yet gives them the best chance of performing well, because you don't want a young cricketer going out with a massive bat that's too heavy for them and stops them playing their shots. There's always new things that people haven't thought about, that whether that's the Scoop on the outside, whether it's other innovations that hopefully will help us deliver that end goal.
Mentioning about the guidelines, or not the guidelines, the strict guidelines of what is and isn't possible. It was the depth of bats that was adjusted, right?
Correct. And
because David Warner, who's not on your stable anymore, but was a few years back, he brought out the Kaboom, is that what it's called? Yeah. And it was a monster.
Huge.
It was literally as wide as that. Now, because of the techniques, these amazing modern day techniques, you can still pick that up and play your shots, but but it was getting to the stage where you didn't have to have much skill to be able to clear a boundary, and so it was necessary and the right decision. Do you think that they had to be
I think with hindsight, we were a little bit upset at the time because we were making really good bats for David and others, but with hindsight, yes. You can argue whether it's size or weight or material that's causing the ball to go, or actual physical, the condition of the player that's causing the ball to go so far. But that aside, what we didn't really want with hindsight is to be producing lots and lots of those big bats for the very reason I just explained. Yeah. You can't get enough timber to make those big bats. So with hindsight, it was the right thing to do.
I'm going to go and chat to Alex in a moment, your master bat maker now. I chatted to him a few months ago, and he said that here at Gray Nichols, you eschew the CNC process. Yeah. So every bat, there's a degree of machinery involved, but every bat is essentially handmade.
Correct.
Which staggered me, because Gray Nichols is a global brand, and you would assume, with respect, that the requirements to churn out so much stuff would mean that you would perhaps have to compromise a little bit on that premium touch that you get with the so-called boutique brands. But you've maintained that.
Yeah.
How good is that for business?
No, well, it is good because we did experiment with the machinery in this sort of when I joined the company, actually, and we just found it didn't, because you're working with a natural material. I'm sure Alex will tell you more than I will, but you can't get that same performance out of a piece of timber that you can if you're handcrafting it. We found we just couldn't get the same result out of the machinery, and that's when, coupled with the move to bowed bats, which are quite difficult to recreate on a machine and get the right pressing. We found that we had to introduce a lot more hand making into the process, and that's since accelerated over the years. And when we set the Indian factory up to the same standards as Australia and England, it was very much looking at how we could maximize that handcrafting rather than focusing on an automated production line.
But it gives the customer the best of both worlds as well, right? So it carries the grandeur of the name and the mark of quality, but also that these obsessives out in the workshop have really given their all to each individual piece of wood. Finally, I'd like to ask you about the players and the relationship between Gray Nichols and the players. Firstly, how does it work? Does Ollie Pope come down here every few weeks? And so talk me through it. And how important is that relationship between player, bat maker, and brand?
Oh, critical, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the reasons that Gray Nichols has, enjoyed the support of the players for so long, because it's not just the product you're getting. Obviously, that's critical, but it's the service you get as well. And we pride ourselves on, obviously, the product, but also the service that we can give to players. So to answer your question, it depends hugely on the individual, actually. Thinking back over my time, the likes of Andrew Strauss and Alistair Cook obviously came down to the factory. We'd love to see them, but they weren't particularly interested in spending hours and hours with a bat maker. They trusted us to produce a bat to their specification, and they were happy to use it and trust our judgment. A number of other players was perhaps more fastidious about the bat and the changes they wanted to make. Mark Ramprakash springs to mind as someone who would come down and spend a long time with the bat makers getting everything just right. NASA was similar.
I've heard that about NASA. So you get a glimpse into what drives them as individuals, right? That meticulousness, attention to detail.
Yeah.
And it seems like somebody like Ramps as well, who was, a superb technician.
Yes. Yeah.
It extends into his relationship with his bats as well.
Totally. Yeah.
And how do you identify the next breed, the next generation of Gray Nichols players? How does that work?
Yeah, again, part of the sort of rich sort of mix of heritage and everything else. I guess we've always prided ourselves on our sort of team of youngsters coming through. So it is normally our players have been with us from the start of their cricketing careers, Alistair Cook being a prime example. You know, when he was at Bedford School scoring all those runs, it was with the Gray Nichols, and same with Andrew Strauss, etc. Zach Crawley's the same, you know, Tunbridge School, used Gray Nichols all the way through. So a lot of that, you know, a lot of, you know, speaking to scouts at that sort of junior level. Bunbury Festival, obviously, you know, we had a very close relationship with David English and that, and the festival for many years before it moved to the UCB. And just sort of making sure that, you know, the right players at that age are sort of being contacted and looked after. So that, I guess that's a big area. And then we're all sort of cricket enthusiasts in the business, and you know, if we see someone or our network sort of pick someone, Harry Brook being a prime example. Our guy up in the north, Dave Pennant, he played a bit of first-class cricket, you know, knew of Harry through the club circuit, and picked up the phone and said, I really think we ought to have a chat with him, and that led to discussions with his agent, etc. And before he was picked for England, he was using Gray Nichols. Yeah, it's a combination of different factors, I guess. Yeah.
So finally then, Richard, what does it look like for Gray Nichols in the coming years as a business? And again, in the context of the industry as a whole, I suppose.
Yeah, well, as we touched on earlier, I think cricket's got a bright future. I think geographically we've already covered, but also the rapid growth of the women's game, which obviously means, you know, potentially twice the number of players playing cricket. So I think that's really exciting. I think the whole Willow discussion will be interesting, how that develops, but I think we're well placed to sort of go whichever way the game decides to go on that. And then I guess for Gray Nichols in particular, you know, we're not just a bat company. You know, we've obviously got teamwear sponsorships with Northamptonshire, with Holland, with Scotland, and it's how far we go on that side of things, because that's been a vital new string to our bow in recent years. Footwear, helmets, you know. So I think the future's bright for us and for cricket more generally. But obviously there are challenges around Willow, as we've discussed, and more widely the whole sustainability of the sports industry. It's something we're spending a lot of time on, you know, whether it's packaging, you know, a whole Willow process of replanting trees, etc., that we've talked about. That's going to become a more and more important part of all our lives, I think. So it's something we're spending a lot of time on now.
Marvellous. Okay, well, thank you ever so much.
Yeah, pleasure.
Fascinating stuff.